I'm Emily, Emily Graves. And if you ask my parents, I'm probably not their daughter. Not really. Not the way my sister is. We're twins born 4 minutes apart. Me, then her. But somehow, in those 4 minutes, fate decided which one of us would get the sunshine and which would live in the shadows. My sister? She's Chloe. The golden child. The one who could blink and get applause. I was more like a footnote, you know? Also, Emily. From the outside, we looked like the perfect suburban family. My dad, Martin, a dentist with a rigid moral code and a taste for bland suits. My mom, Denise, an ex-cheerleader turned overbearing Pinterest mom. And of course, Chloe, the walking embodiment of their hopes and dreams. Then, there was me. Technically included, practically forgotten. Even as a kid, I noticed it. Chloe got the new Barbie dream house for her birthday. I got her hand-me-downs, missing shoes, tangled hair and all. She'd cry if her apple juice had too much pulp, and Mom would swoop in like a crisis counselor. I'd fall off the monkey bars and scrape my whole knee open, and all I'd get was a napkin and, "You're strong, Em, go play." One time, when we were 5, Chloe wanted to climb the jungle gym, but chickened out halfway up. She was sobbing, shaking. I was scared too, but I climbed it anyway, made it to the top, jumped off. Scraped my arm but landed on my feet. My dad came running, straight to Chloe. "You're so brave for trying," he said, hugging her. Then he looked at me. "Emily, don't be reckless. You could have broken something." I remember just standing there, dirt on my face, heart full of hope that fizzled out on the spot. That was the first time I realized I'd never be enough for them, not unless I became someone extraordinary. So, I tried. In grade school, I poured myself into writing and art. I won a regional drawing contest at 9 and wrote short stories that got pinned on the classroom walls. Mom barely glanced at them. Meanwhile, Chloe made a half-crushed macaroni owl, and Mom cried like it belonged in the Louvre. I stopped showing my awards. I stopped expecting a well done. By middle school, it became more subtle, more insidious. Chloe had a meltdown over getting a B- on a history test. My parents ordered takeout, sat with her, helped her recover. I brought home a report card with all A's and 1 A- in algebra, and Mom said, "Let's not get cocky, Em. There's always someone better." It was like that for years. Praise for Chloe came easily. For me, everything felt transactional. I had to earn attention scrap for it like crumbs. And I wasn't lazy, I didn't rebel, I just got quiet, I did my homework, I joined clubs, I interned. I learned how to get by without applause. I became independent, not because it was noble, but because I had no other choice. When senior year rolled around, Chloe and I both announced that we wanted to major in business analytics. She said it casually, like she was choosing between lattes. I'd spent 2 years researching programs, applying for scholarships, building spreadsheets to track expenses because I knew what was coming. My parents immediately agreed to pay Chloe's full tuition. "Let's not have her worry about finances," Dad said. "We'll take care of everything so she can focus." Then came my turn. "Emily," Dad said, "you've always been the practical one. I'm sure you'll figure it out, grants, scholarships, maybe some part-time work." It wasn't even malicious, just matter of fact. Like it had already been decided, so I did what I always did. I figured it out. I juggled applications, wrote essays at 2 a.m., researched every federal and private scholarship under the sun. I applied for 5, won 3. The rest I covered with student loans and campus jobs. We ended up going to the same university, Chloe, in a deluxe dorm suite paid for by Mom and Dad, and me in a noisy co-ed building that always smelled like top ramen and regret. She partied. I worked in the library. She joined Greek life. I cleaned classrooms in the evenings. She got gift cards just because from our parents. I budgeted down to the cent and survived on canned beans and peanut butter. Sometimes we'd cross paths on campus. She'd flash her usual pity smile and say, "You always look tired, Em. You should take better care of yourself." I'd just nod, because if I said what I was really thinking, it wouldn't end well. I wasn't jealous, not exactly. I was just tired. Tired of being the one who had to earn love while she got it on credit. Sophomore year, I started interning at a small consulting firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, I literally made coffee runs and sorted spreadsheets, but it gave me experience. I listened, learned, absorbed everything. My supervisor once called me a sponge with claws. I think it was meant to be a compliment. Meanwhile, Chloe was struggling with electives and partying more than studying. She never noticed that I was up at dawn, working through lectures before my shift, or that I was prepping for my CPA exams a whole year early. Our parents didn't either. They still assumed I was getting by, while their golden girl was surely on her way to greatness. And then something unexpected happened. One of my professors, Dr. Patel, a stern but brilliant man who taught forensic accounting, asked to meet after class. "You've got a knack for this," he said. "Ever consider applying for the Whitaker Fellowship?" I blinked. That was one of the biggest scholarships in the country. It funded a full year of advanced study abroad. Only 5 people got it each year. One never thought I'd qualify. He smiled. "You might want to check your own resume. I already submitted your name for consideration." I almost cried right there. I didn't tell Chloe or my parents. I'd learned by then when I hoped for their validation, I usually got silence in return. Instead, I spent the next month assembling my application like it was a nuclear launch code, essays, recommendations, portfolios, and a video submission. I gave it everything, and then I waited. The email came during a shift at the tutoring center. My hands shook as I opened it. I'd been selected. I was one of 5. I'd won, and this time I wasn't going to hide it. When I got that email saying I'd won the Whitaker Fellowship, I sat frozen in my chair. The tutoring center was nearly empty. A couple of students mumbling over whiteboards in the back, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Me? One of 5 in the country? I closed the laptop and stared at the wall for a minute, then walked to the bathroom and cried like a lunatic in the 3rd stall. Not the pretty, movie tear kind of cry. The snotty, shoulder-shaking, ugly cry you don't come back from without puffy eyes. And not just because I was proud, but because, for the first time ever, I had done something big, undeniably big, without anyone's help, money, or hand-holding. I could have called my parents right then, but I didn't, because I already knew what the response would be. A polite wow, nice, maybe followed by something about how Chloe had just gone on a trip with her econ club to some vineyard. No thanks. I didn't want another lukewarm applause for a roaring victory. Instead, I called Dr. Patel. "Professor," I said, my voice still shaky. "I got it." There was a pause, and then he said, "I never doubted you, Emily." Funny how 5 words from a professor hit harder than a lifetime of half-baked encouragement from my own parents. The fellowship committee asked if I'd like to bring family to the award ceremony, which would be held at a major university a few hours away. "It's a big day," they said. "Bring someone who supported you." I laughed under my breath. The list of people who supported me was exactly 1 name long, and he already had his own invite. But I still ended up calling home. "Hey, Mom," I said on the phone. "I've been selected for something huge. That scholarship I mentioned months ago, well, I won. There's a formal ceremony. They want parents to attend." Silence. Then, "Oh, that's good, sweetie. When is it?" "Next Friday. Early morning. I can send the invite." "Huh. Let me talk to your father." She didn't sound proud. She sounded mildly inconvenienced, like I'd invited her to a Tupperware party across state lines. I emailed the details anyway, but I already knew not to expect much. Still, the hopeful part of me, the part I hated for, still existing, prayed they'd come. The morning of the ceremony, I woke up before my alarm. I'd spent the night at a cheap hotel near campus, because the fellowship organizers wanted us there early for rehearsal. I put on the nicest dress I owned, a black midi with a simple neckline and sleeves that made it feel formal but not too flashy. It was the same one I wore to job interviews and academic banquets. Classic. Safe. Mine. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself, not because I looked different, but because I looked confident, like someone who belonged in that room. When I got to the venue, the other recipients were already buzzing around. One of them had brought their entire extended family. Another was FaceTiming their grandma from the front row. I just sat quietly, waiting for the moment my name would be called. Then I saw them, my parents, and Chloe. They'd shown up. They were seated in the middle of the audience, looking around like they'd wandered into the wrong event. Mom was fiddling with her scarf. Dad was pretending to read the program. Chloe, of course, looked like she was attending the Met Gala. Designer dress, flawless makeup. perfect hair. She glanced around the room with an air of mild superiority, like the event was beneath her. I didn't wave. I didn't go over. I just turned back toward the stage. We were each being introduced individually, with a little bio read out loud and a photo slideshow. When it was my turn, the host said, "Emily Graves, a student known for her resilience, independence, and exceptional intellect. While balancing multiple jobs and an intensive course load, Emily not only maintained top academic performance, but also demonstrated leadership and initiative in real-world applications. She is a shining example of what it means to earn success through determination." As I walked up to the stage, I glanced at the crowd. I saw my mom's face tighten. My dad blinked in confusion. Chloe looked annoyed. I smiled. The award felt heavy in my hands, but in the best way. It was proof, tangible proof that I mattered, that I had done something, become someone without their money, their cheerleading, or their half-hearted claps. Afterward, there was a small reception. People were taking photos, professors introducing us to potential employers. All of it, a blur of champagne and networking. And then, my parents walked over. "Well," my mom said, voice stiff, "you really didn't say how big this thing was." "I didn't think you'd be interested," I replied. There was no anger in my voice, just calm truth. My dad cleared his throat. "You've done well, Emily. We didn't realize you were doing so much on your own." "You never asked," I said, turning to look at Chloe. She was silent. "Did you ever wonder how I paid for school?" I asked her. "How I covered my rent? Food? Books?" "One. Just thought you had a scholarship," she said, eyes flicking away. "Yeah, scholarships, jobs, loans, cleaning classrooms, working nights at the library while you were out partying." The silence stretched. "Anyway," I said, "thanks for coming. I hope the drive wasn't too annoying." Before they could respond, a man in a suit approached me. "Miss Graves? I'm Alex Callahan from Grant and Knight Financial. We'd love to talk with you about a summer position. Do you have a moment?" I smiled and turned away from my family. That night, I sat on my hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't angry, not exactly, just released. That moment on stage, holding that plaque, hearing the applause, that was the first time in my life I felt fully seen. Not by my parents, not by Chloe, but by myself. It wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. For so long, I'd been climbing a mountain, hoping someone at the top would say, "You made it." But I'd reached the peak and realized I never needed their validation to begin with. I opened my laptop and started looking at internships in New York, Chicago, even London. Big cities, big dreams, my dreams. The next phase of my life was waiting. And for the first time ever, it was mine. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and took the train back to campus. No fanfare, no family brunch, no flowers. Just me, my backpack, and a head full of plans. On the ride home, I kept replaying the moment the fellowship host read out my bio, how every sentence was a reminder of the quiet grind I'd put in when nobody was watching. It felt surreal, not like a dream, but like I had finally woken up. And honestly, it felt peaceful. I got back to my dorm, dropped my stuff, and changed into a hoodie. There was still homework to finish, interviews to prep for, CPA material to review, but I gave myself one night off. I heated up some leftover pasta, grabbed a cheap bottle of wine from my emergency drawer, and watched reruns of The Office until I fell asleep on the couch. It was the first time in years I'd allowed myself to feel completely still. The week after the ceremony, my mom called. Not texted, actually called. That in itself felt suspicious. I answered on the third ring. "Emily," she said, her tone unusually light. "We were just talking about you. Your dad said you've really been doing well. We didn't realize you were so involved with things. You ever have someone say something nice, and it feels like they're reading off a cue card?" I leaned back in my chair. Well, it's all out there now, I guess. There was a pause. Then, "I know we haven't always shown it, but we're proud of you." And I swear I almost laughed. Now they were proud, after years of silence, but I didn't fight it. I just nodded, even though she couldn't see it, and said, "Thanks." Then came the real reason she called. "Chloe's been having a rough time lately," she said. "Her grades are slipping. She's thinking about switching majors." Of course, she feels a bit lost, and she sees you doing so well. I think she's just overwhelmed. Mom, I said, she's had every advantage. If she's lost, it's not because I succeeded. I didn't say that, she replied quickly. But maybe you could talk to her, give her some advice? I stared at the wall, feeling that old, familiar twinge where my achievements somehow became Chloe's burden. I'm not sure she wants my advice, I said. She never did before. She's your sister. She is... I agreed. But that doesn't mean she listens. We hung up a few minutes later, but the conversation sat in my chest like a weight. A couple of days later, Chloe messaged me on Instagram. Hey, you free to talk? I stared at the message for a while. It was the first time she'd reached out in months. Maybe even longer. Yeah, what's up? Can I stop by your place? 10 minutes later, she showed up at my dorm, dressed down for once leggings, hoodie, no makeup. She looked like a different person. She sat on the edge of my bed, fiddling with the sleeve of her sweater. I saw the photos from the ceremony, she said. You looked important. I raised an eyebrow. Thanks, I guess? She let out a half laugh. I don't know. It's just weird. I always thought I'd be the one doing big things. There it was. I didn't say anything, just waited. She looked down. Mom and Dad, they've been comparing us lately. I hate it. That almost made me laugh. Oh, so now you know how it feels? I asked. She winced. I didn't mean it like that. It's like they expect me to be like you now, independent, focused. But I don't know what I'm doing, Emily. I don't have a plan. You never had to, I said. That was the difference. She nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe that's the problem. I should have felt vindicated. I should have smiled and said, told you so. But I didn't. I just felt tired. We sat in silence for a few moments. Then she asked, Are you mad at me? I thought about that. No, I said. I'm not mad. I'm just done trying to prove I belong. I don't need anything from you or from them. She nodded again, quietly. And that was the end of that conversation. Life kept moving. I accepted an internship in New York at a mid-sized accounting firm that had ties to the fellowship committee. The job didn't pay much, but it opened doors, real doors. It was the kind of place where people wore navy blazers and carried espresso like it was currency. I learned more in those 10 weeks than in my entire degree. They had me shadow client meetings, review tax structures, even assist on a small internal audit. I felt like a rookie in the majors, but I kept up. Back at school, Chloe drifted in and out of my life. We'd text now and then. She asked about resume tips once. Another time, she sent me a photo of her cat. It was never deep, just polite. At one point, she told me she was thinking of taking a gap year after graduation. I don't know who I am without them, she said. It hit me that she meant Mom and Dad. And maybe for the first time, I felt something like pity, because I did know who I was without them. Graduation came faster than I expected. I wasn't emotional about it. There wasn't some big you did it moment. It just felt like closing a chapter I'd already outgrown. My parents didn't come. Mom said something vague about logistics and too much going on. I said I understood. I didn't. But I said it anyway. Dr. Patel came. He hugged me after the ceremony and said, "The world doesn't know it yet, but you're going to be a problem in the best way." That made me smile for real. Later that night, I packed up my apartment. I didn't have much, just a couple of suitcases and a folder full of dreams. I was moving to New York in 2 weeks. Chloe stopped by again, this time just to say goodbye. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, arms folded. "I'm happy for you, Em," she said, "even if I don't always show it." I looked at her. She looked older somehow, a little softer, a little lost. "Thanks," I said. "I hope you figure things out too." Then she did something that caught me off guard. She hugged me. It wasn't long or emotional, just a quiet, sisterly hug, the kind we probably should have shared as kids. And then she left. The night before my move, I stood at the window of my empty apartment, looking out at the streetlights and the quiet campus below. For the first time, I wasn't looking back. I wasn't waiting for an apology or a pat on the back. I had made it through without shortcuts, without spotlights, without being the favorite. And now I was stepping into a life that was truly mine. Whatever came next, I was ready. The first week in New York almost broke me. I'd dreamed of skyscrapers and glowing lights, of being a young professional in the big city with a fierce coffee habit and a view of the skyline. But reality? Reality was fluorescent lit cubicles, overpriced groceries, and a roommate who turned out to be a part-time EDM DJ with a full-time commitment to late-night mixing. I was working 12-hour shifts at my new job, junior auditor, at Denton and Wakefield. The firm had a reputation, high standards, low tolerance for mistakes. I didn't mind that. Pressure was familiar. It felt like home in a twisted way. My supervisor, Mason, was one of those guys who wore his ambition like a second skin. He walked fast, talked faster, and expected you to read his mind. But he was sharp, and he noticed effort. I liked that. First week, he asked me to double-check some financial reports. Most newbies just skimmed and rubber-stamped them. I stayed late and found a small discrepancy, $4,212 listed, as training expenses that didn't line up with any event records. The next morning, I showed him my notes. He stared at me, deadpan, for a long second. "You found this?" "Yeah. On your third day? Is that bad?" He let out a small laugh. "No. That's damn impressive." That afternoon, he copied me on a team-wide email. Shout out to Emily for catching a reporting inconsistency in Q3. Great eye. It wasn't much, but it meant something. Validation wasn't just a pat on the back anymore, it was opportunity. And I'd take that over empty praise any day. Living in New York taught me how to stretch a dollar until it practically snapped. My half of the rent ate up most of my paycheck, so I walked everywhere, cooked at home, and found every happy hour with $2 tacos within a 10-block radius. But even with the stress, I loved it. There was something intoxicating about the city's rhythm. Everyone was moving, everyone had somewhere to be, something to chase. For once, I wasn't the only one hustling. I was just another face in the crowd, and I found comfort in that. On weekends, I'd take long walks with no destination. I'd wander through Soho, sit in little cafes with a book people watch in Washington Square Park. And sometimes, I'd think about how far I'd come, not in a self-congratulatory way, more like gratitude mixed with disbelief. There were moments when I still caught myself expecting to fail. Like some part of me had internalized the idea that success was for other people. But those thoughts were quieter now, easier to challenge. I was building something one audit, one spreadsheet, one late-night ramen dinner at a time. Around month 4, I got a call from Chloe. I was walking home from work, mentally debating whether I had the energy to cook or just eat cereal for dinner, when my phone lit up. Chloe, that was still her contact name. I hadn't changed it since college. I answered, Hey, you busy? Always. What's up?" There was a long pause. "I just wanted to say congrats," she said. "I saw your company featured in some finance article about rising audit firms. Your name was mentioned." I paused mid-step. "Seriously?" "Yeah. You're listed as part of the new talent division." Mom printed it out. I stopped walking. "Mom printed something about me?" "I know." I was shocked too. I laughed. "That's wild. I guess they're finally catching up." I didn't know what to say to that. She cleared her throat. "Also, I got a job." "Really? That's great. Where?" "At this small marketing agency back home. It's nothing big, but it's mine." And just like that, the conversation shifted. We talked for 20 minutes about work, roommates, how we both still felt like we were pretending to be adults. It was the most normal talk we'd had in years. And it made me wonder, was this what sisterhood was supposed to feel like? Was it possible to start again, without all the old baggage? I didn't have the answer. But for the first time, I was open to the question. At work, things were moving fast. After 6 months, Mason pulled me aside and said, "How do you feel about leading your own client account?" I blinked. "Seriously?" He nodded. "You've earned it. You're meticulous, reliable, and honestly, you work harder than people twice your age." That night, I walked home with a stupid grin on my face. It was happening. Bit by bit, my name was starting to mean something in rooms where I used to be invisible. I didn't call my parents. Not out of spite, just. I didn't feel the need. I didn't need someone to say, "We're proud of you," for me to feel proud anymore. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from my grandmother. The envelope was cream-colored with neat handwriting, and smelled faintly of lavender, just like the hand lotion she always kept in her purse. Inside was a simple card with a note. "Dear Emily, I saw the article your mom brought over. I always knew you'd make your own way. Quiet power is still power, you know. I'm so proud of you. Come visit soon. Love always." Grandma, I held the card for a long time. That one paragraph meant more than any award I'd ever received. I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear those words from someone who'd always seen me, even when no one else did. Summer turned into fall, and fall blurred into winter. I was thriving, but I was also tired. Not in a burnt-out way, just aware of the pace I was keeping. Late one night, I sat on my fire escape with a mug of tea, watching the city breathe. It was a cold, quiet kind of night. The kind where your thoughts get loud. I thought about that little girl who used to stay up late drawing pictures no one ever praised. The teenager who wrote essays for contests her mom never read. The college student scrubbing floors at 11 p.m. to afford textbooks. And I wished I could tell her, you were never invisible. You were just waiting for the world to catch up. Winter in New York was a different beast. It wasn't just cold. It was a cold that snuck into your bones, made you question why you ever left the house. The kind that reminded you how small you really were in a city so big. But somehow, I liked it. I liked the silence of snow falling on crowded sidewalks. I liked the feeling of walking fast through frozen wind, earbuds in, playlist loud, heart focused. And I especially liked not going home for the holidays. I told my parents I was too busy at work, that my firm needed me for year-end reporting. Technically not a lie, but not exactly the full truth either. The truth was, I didn't want to go back. Not because I was angry, not anymore. It's hard to stay angry when you've stopped expecting anything. I just let go. It was the same weight I'd been carrying for years, the one that whispered, maybe this time they'll see you. Maybe this time they'll care. But that voice had gone quiet. And I realized that peace doesn't always come from resolution. Sometimes it comes from release. I spent Christmas with coworkers, young transplants like me, who didn't have the time, money, or desire to go back home. We had a potluck dinner in someone's studio apartment, played board games until 2 a.m., and watched cheesy holiday movies with dollar store wine and thrifted decorations. It was nothing special, and it was perfect. No performances, no comparing, just warmth, noise, laughter. No one knew my family history. No one cared that I wasn't the favorite. I was just Emily, the one who brought homemade cookies and beat everyone at Scrabble. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's joy. A few days into January, I got a text from Chloe. "You busy?" I stared at it for a second, then replied, "What's up?" She called me immediately. "Hey," she said. Her voice was quieter than usual. "I know this is kind of last minute, but Grandma's not doing well." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "She's been in the hospital for a few days. Respiratory stuff." Mom didn't want to say anything until they knew more. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "I don't know," she said, voice cracking. "I guess I was hoping it would blow over." She always bounces back, you know? She didn't. Not this time. I booked the next flight out. When I walked into the hospital room, it hit me just how small Grandma looked. The woman who used to bake me ginger cookies, who always smelled like lilac and peppermints, who used to send me handwritten letters with pressed flowers folded into them, was now lying there with tubes in her nose and machines humming around her. But her eyes still lit up when she saw me. "My girl," she whispered, voice raspy but steady. "Look at you. You came." "Of course I did," I said, grabbing her hand. "I saw your article," she smiled faintly. "I told every nurse who'd listen. Said, that one's mine." I laughed through the lump in my throat. "I wish I could have seen you walk across that stage," she added. "But you didn't need an audience, did you?" "No," I whispered, tears finally slipping down my cheeks. "I didn't." She passed 2 days later. The funeral was small. Snow was falling as we stood around her grave, the white flakes landing on her casket like delicate confetti. A quiet goodbye for the loudest kind of love. Afterward, we went back to my parents' house. I hadn't been there in almost 2 years, and it felt surreal. Nothing had changed. Same photos on the walls, mostly of Chloe. Same furniture, same stiff air. At one point, I stood in the hallway, looking at a framed picture from middle school. Chloe was in the center, holding some trophy. I was next to her, cropped slightly at the edge, mid-blink. Poetic, honestly. Mom walked up behind me. "I should have done better," she said softly. I turned to face her. She looked older. Not just physically, there was something tired in her eyes. Worn down by years she couldn't rewind. "I didn't know how to love you the way you needed," she continued. I thought being strong meant not needing much. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," she added. I nodded. "I know." We stood there in silence, both holding pieces of a conversation we weren't quite ready to finish. Later that night, Chloe found me on the porch. She handed me a cup of tea and sat down beside me. "Grandma left you something," she said. In her will, I raised an eyebrow. "Me? She left you her journals." "And the necklace. The one with the little compass charm." I blinked. "I thought she said that was going to the first great-grandchild." "She changed her mind," Chloe said. "Said you'd earned it." We sat in silence again, watching snow fall against the porch light. "I've been thinking," Chloe said, her voice quiet. "About us. About you." "I'm listening," I said. "I used to feel bad for you," she admitted. "I thought you were lonely. That you were always working so hard because you didn't have a choice. You weren't wrong," I said. "But now," she continued, "I think maybe you had something I didn't. A kind of fire. I never had to build anything myself." "Not really. That's not your fault." "I know. But it's still true." She looked over at me. "You're not the same person I grew up with." "Neither are you," I said. She smiled, and for the first time, it felt real. Back in New York, the air felt different. Maybe because I was carrying something new. The compass necklace rested against my chest light, warm, familiar. Like Grandma was still with me, pointing north when things got loud or confusing. I read her journals late at night. Her handwriting, looping and careful, filled pages with thoughts she'd never said aloud. About love and loss and how she always believed I'd turn pain into power. In one entry she wrote, "Emily's quiet now, but she won't be forever. She's like water, steady, patient, always moving toward her own current. One day she'll flood everything that tried to contain her." I closed the book and stared at the ceiling. "Flood everything, huh?" "Yeah, that sounded about right." A few weeks later, I got a call from the partners at my firm. They wanted me to lead a new project and expansion into the nonprofit sector, something I'd been quietly pushing for since day one. "You've got the skills," they said, "and the drive." I accepted. Then I went home, looked in the mirror, and saw someone I finally recognized. Not the quiet twin, not the girl scraping for praise. Just me, Emily Graves, professional, leader, woman with purpose. And I whispered something out loud just to hear it. "You made it." The morning I signed my first partnership track contract, it didn't feel real. I thought I'd feel this rush, this fireworks moment. But it wasn't like that. It was calm, quiet, like slipping into a life that had already been waiting for me. My office was small, barely big enough for a desk, a plant, and a second chair, but it had a window, a real one, and a view of the skyline that years ago had only lived in the corners of my imagination. I stood there for a long time, watching the city wake up beneath a soft layer of snow. Coffee in one hand, Grandma's compass necklace resting against my skin. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. A few months later, Chloe visited me in the city. She'd just turned 26 and was in the middle of applying for grad programs. Counseling, of all things. That surprised me, but also didn't. She'd changed. In quiet, slow ways. She still liked expensive lattes and over-accessorized outfits, but there was something new in her, a little less polish, a little more depth. We walked through Central Park, bundled in scarves and beanies, sipping hot chocolate. "Your apartment is nicer than I expected," she said. I grinned. "That's your way of saying you thought I'd be living in a shoebox." She shrugged, playful. "Just saying, it's not what I pictured for little Miss Overachiever." I nudged her. "You came here in heels. Let's not throw stones." She laughed, and for a second we were kids again before all the unspoken things built walls between us. "Can I tell you something weird?" she asked, a little quieter. "Always. I used to think you were lucky." I stopped walking. She glanced at me. "Not because you had less, but because you had to figure things out. No one handed you anything. You built your life. I just borrowed mine for a while. I didn't say anything right away. I let her words settle, let them breathe. Luck is a funny thing, I finally said. Sometimes it looks like struggle until you zoom out. She smiled. Well, for what it's worth, you inspire me. That hit harder than I expected. Not because I needed the praise, but because I knew how much it cost her to say that out loud. We kept walking, the wind brushing past us in small waves. No drama, no breakdowns. Just two sisters, slowly rewriting the story we'd been handed. Later that night, I got a call from my mom. She rarely called anymore, but when she did, it was softer, gentler. Like she knew she was holding something fragile. I found one of your old short stories, she said almost shyly. The one about the girl in the glass wings. I remembered that story. I wrote it when I was 12. It was about a girl who wasn't allowed to fly because her wings looked too fragile. So she jumped anyway and discovered they weren't glass at all. They were steel, disguised in shimmer. You wrote that in 6th grade? She asked. Yeah, it was beautiful. My throat tightened. Thanks. I wish I had seen it then. Really seen it. I let the silence stretch a bit before saying, you see it now. And somehow, that felt enough. In early spring, I spoke at a career panel for undergrads. Someone from the fellowship committee had recommended me, and I figured why not? The auditorium was full of students scribbling notes, half listening, half daydreaming like students always do. I sat on stage between a tech startup, CEO, and a corporate recruiter with an impressive collection of buzzwords. When it was my turn, I stood at the podium and looked out over the sea of unsure faces. I'm not here to tell you it's easy, I started. It's not. And it's not supposed to be. But hard doesn't mean hopeless. That got their attention. I didn't come from money. I didn't have connections. I didn't even have parents who really believed in me. What I had was a reason, and sometimes that's more powerful than anything. I told them about library shifts at midnight, about walking to interviews in shoes with worn soles, about scrubbing floors to afford books, while classmates posted about spring break in Cabo. I told them about moments when I thought no one was watching, how those were the exact moments that made me who I am. Don't chase applause, I said. Chase purpose. Build something no one can take from you. After the event, a girl came up to me, first-generation college student, working 2 jobs. She looked nervous. Can I ask, how did you keep going when it felt pointless? I smiled. Because I knew I was building something that would last longer than pain. She nodded slowly. I needed to hear that. We hugged. I remembered what it felt like to be her, and I promised myself I'd never forget. That summer, I traveled. First time in years, I let myself breathe. I visited Spain, then Italy, then a tiny village in Ireland that looked like it had fallen out of a painting. I took photos, drank wine, wrote in a journal I barely let anyone read. And I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who sat alone in the cafeteria, who got excited over A+ grades no one clapped for, who kept showing up long after she stopped being seen. I didn't pity her anymore. I honored her. Because without her, there'd be no me. Years passed. I grew into leadership roles, mentored interns, helped launch a women in finance initiative at my firm, bought a place in Brooklyn, small, sunlit, and entirely mine. Chloe moved to Boston, got her master's, and started working at a counseling center for teens. Sometimes we'd meet halfway for lunch, talk about life, books, therapy, how weird it is that we're adults now. My parents, we keep in touch. It's civil, not close, but respectful, and that's enough. They don't ask for more than I'm willing to give. I don't give more than I have. It's balanced. Finally, one day, I pulled out Grandma's compass necklace from its velvet pouch. It had scratches now, little nicks and dings from being worn through years of hustle, but the needle still pointed north, always had. And for once, I wasn't looking for direction. I was just remembering. Remembering the way she looked at me when no one else did. Remembering the way it felt to win something no one expected me to. Remembering that, sometimes, family isn't about who raised you, but about who saw you. Now, when people ask who I am, I don't start with where I came from. I start with what I've built. I tell them, I'm Emily Graves, and I am not the forgotten twin. I'm not the strong one by default. I'm not the backup daughter, the fallback plan, the shadow. I'm the architect of my own life. I love hard. I work harder. I give credit where it's due, even when I never got it. And I never beg to be seen, because now I know I've always been worth seeing. Story 2. My escort card only said waitress when I went to my sister's wedding. Mom laughed when she saw it. I so broke off contact with them right away. Mother called me a few weeks later to inform me that the auto loan was still unpaid. Because I'm only a waitress, am I? I asked. Jocelyn is my name. I work at an advertising business a little ways from the bustle of the city, and I am presently 28 years old. I have always worked hard since I was a small child, paving my own way on my own. On the other hand, my mother saw my younger sister Alexandra as the golden child. Our mother lavished Alexandra with affection and forgiven everything she did. The disparity in how we were handled has frequently upset me. They laughed and dismissed Alexandra when she acted selfishly. She's only a kid. I was told to remain patient at that time. The older sister is you. One gradually came to feel as though I had lost my position in our family and had to learn to put up with things quietly. The death of our father caused a permanent breach in our relationship. The more our mother loved Alexandra, the more she became dependent on her. To help with our family's finances, I left college in the interim, and I progressively drifted away from the family. When I wasn't there, Alexandra and my mother would laugh together and treat me like nothing. I ultimately made the decision to leave home even after I got back. On my 25th birthday, unable to find my place at home, I had yearned to leave the family's disputes and loneliness behind. I was going to make a name for myself in the world. I eventually began living alone after saving money. I established a new life base close to the business, which is accessible by foot. I've automatically distanced myself from my mother and sister since moving out. First, it was to release the anger and discontent I had suppressed. My relationship with Alexandra gradually changed, and my visits home seemed to diffuse the stressful situation a little, but there were still traces of bitterness in my heart. Then, on Thanksgiving Day of last year, I finally got to see Alexandra and my mother. As always, Alexandra was beaming as my mother handed us warm food. That day, though, I was taken aback when Alexandra abruptly informed me of her impending marriage. Alexandra was uncomfortable as she added, "Actually, I'm getting married next week." My mother didn't say anything, she just grinned. My thoughts were conflicted. The request. It was unexpected and confusing to have only a week's notice. However, there was also a subtle inward sensation of relaxation. In some ways, I still believed that my mother's love was unjust. Observing my mother's exuberant response to Alexandra's union, I was reminded once more of that love's unwavering weight. I felt a little lost in the middle of my mother's continual overprotectiveness for Alexandra. "Why didn't you tell me about the marriage sooner?" I questioned Alexandra. "We are related." My voice unintentionally rose as my words spilled out. Alexandra hesitated for a moment before answering, looking puzzled. "I'm sorry, Jocelyn, but it was difficult to tell you because you appeared busy since you moved out. I didn't want to cause you any trouble." I felt my chest constrict as she offered her apologies. "Why didn't you tell me earlier then? What happened suddenly? Next week is a wedding." I was still furious. Looking down, Alexandra could think of nothing to say. Then my mother added, "Jocelyn, try to understand what Alexandra was feeling," with a soft smile as she looked at her. "There wasn't a good moment to notify you, because you haven't been home or in contact. It was unavoidable." It sounded as though my mother was protecting Alexandra with her comments. I was instantly rendered speechless. My sense of exclusion persisted as I stood between Alexandra and my mother, or was I always just an outsider looking in, no matter how hard I tried? The night I found out the wedding was next week, I discreetly left the scene since I couldn't accept it. I had a range of complicated emotions throughout that time, including a sense of celebration for Alexandra's delight. I was also experiencing a flurry of anxiety and turmoil. Even though I didn't cry, I could feel my emotions rising. It was the emotional wall I had erected over the years, which the family had never really valued. As the wedding day drew near, I experienced sadness, poignancy, and an overwhelming sense of loneliness. I needed to work out my emotions. Alexandra's marriage was something I wanted to celebrate, but I also needed to reevaluate my role in the family. Would I ever have the joy that my mother and Alexandra experience? Or am I destined to always be alone in the family? My urge to skip the wedding grew stronger with time. I felt abandoned when I walked inside the venue on the wedding day. Long ago, the elegantly decorated hall was flooded with the gentle glow of the chandelier and the happy voices and smiles of the guests. I took a deep breath, adjusted the hem of my dress, and walked over to the reception. My name was missing from the seating map that I was given. A sensation of unease surged inside me, as if my presence was not even permitted. Perplexed, I unintentionally questioned a staff person nearby, who gave me a somewhat confused look before directing me by stating, "Your seat is over here." I was taken aback by the location and overcome with feelings that I could not describe as I sat in a corner at the extreme edge of the stadium, seemingly out of sight. In addition, the place card's edge was somewhat crooked, evidently handled with negligence. My heart stopped the instant my shaking fingers took up the card. The waitress. I again blinked, double-checking the text, but there it was, clearly printed. My knees felt like they would buckle at any second, and my fingers were shaking. My body felt a jolt, as though my fundamental being were being rejected. What is this? I spoke in a raspy whisper that no one could hear, but just then, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. Alexandra was standing in her wedding gown, looking like she was in a movie scene. When I turned around, lovely. Her smile, however, was as icy as ice. "Are you fond of it?" There was a trace of malice in her voice. I gasped and looked at her while holding the card. "What does this signify?" Alexandra gave a nasal snort. "What it says is precisely what it implies. You don't truly belong to our family. Being a waiter seems like a good fit for you." I lost my train of thought. I started to respond, but nothing came out of my mouth. I glanced to the side, sensing someone's eyes, and my mother was standing there. She gave Alexandra a pleasant smile, without even looking at me. "Alexandra, you look absolutely stunning. Seeing you in this state makes your mother very proud." She pretended that I was non-existent. Everything made sense at that particular time. My mom was aware of this slight. She even appeared to be having fun with it. My heart ached from the years of loneliness and isolation I had experienced. "What are you saying? I'm not related?" My mother gave me a chilly look and remained silent when I eventually choked out the words. Alexandra said, "Well, you've always been different from us, haven't you?" with a shrug. "In addition, you were rarely at home when Dad passed away and eventually moved out. If you now behave like family, it's concerning." I had put in a lot of labor to help the family when my father passed away. I spent less time at home to protect them, not because I was losing affection. But why should I put up with this? In annoyance, I bit my lip, but I refrained from crying. I would be playing straight into their hands if I started crying. I took a deep breath and held on to the card. From the depths of my heart, icy rage rose. Now that I've seen it, I can put those words aside. I turned away. Behind me, I could hear Alexandra laughing, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't going to lose to them. I could no longer be trodden underfoot. I took out my smartphone and walked to a corner of the arena. It included a file that proved my retaliation against Alexandra. Actually, 3 months ago, Alexandra's friend and coworker Mandy told me that she was getting married. However, I didn't hear anything about it. I was outraged and had decided to take revenge on Alexandra. I started to gently snoop around Alexandra's social group. Initially, it was only rumors, but with time, more startling facts surfaced. Among acquaintances, there were rumors that Alexandra had been spotted making out with someone other than her fiancé. It was difficult for me to believe at first, but Mandy told me straight out. In fact, I couldn't have imagined the narrative she began to tell me. Alexandra had been meeting with another man in secret, even though she was betrothed. Finding out from Mandy that Alexandra had been embezzling money from our mother was even more startling. Alexandra once said, "Mom's money is like my money," which Mandy overheard. "I'm free to utilize everything on her account." "Is that truly acceptable?" Mandy asked. "It's fine," Alexandra said, dismissing it. "We are related." That little gadget was jam-packed with the evidence I had collected with Mandy's assistance. I pretended to be unaware of the wedding when I learned about it a week ago and discreetly departed the home. On the inside, though, I knew what I had to do. I calmed my heart by taking a big breath. Emotions couldn't influence me here. I would undoubtedly and calmly make amends for this humiliation. The attendees engaged in lively conversation as the celebration got underway. There was a weight on my chest that I couldn't describe. The place card, the icy grin of my mother. The feelings I had repressed were slowly bubbling up inside me as a result of Alexandra's statements. Would anyone care to speak a few words to the bride and groom at the last minute? When the host asked, I got to my feet. Leaving in silence was not an option for me. I couldn't look on indifferently as they displayed their expertly designed stage. I moved stealthily up to the microphone. All eyes were on me as the room went quiet. I inhaled deeply as I gripped the microphone with shaking hands. I appreciate everyone coming together today. I'm Alexandra's sister, Jocelyn. I started talking gently. What a beautiful wedding. I have to tell everyone here about something, though. I plugged my smartphone onto the screen and showed pictures of Alexandra's infidelity. A picture of Alexandra kissing another man was one of them. I had hired a detective to get this proof. I then played a recording of a discussion in which Alexandra was talking to Mandy about how she was using our mother's money as her own without restriction. The space was filled with the astonished voices of the attendees. What is this? The groom's face became white as he exclaimed. My mother got to her feet, listening to the noise that filled the room and staring at me in disbelief. For the first time, she realized that Alexandra had been embezzling funds from her own account. She had a puzzled and surprised look on her face. I nevertheless kept up my forceful tone of voice. I wanted the truth to be celebrated by everybody. Alexandra started crying as the arena descended into mayhem. Then, trembling with rage, the groom sprang up and shouted at Alexandra. Alexandra, what does this mean? Give an explanation. I sat down the microphone gently. My retaliation was this. As chaos erupted during the wedding, I walked out of the arena. I inhaled deeply as the chilly night air brushed my face. I felt a whirlpool of emptiness and fury. I'm still thinking about the current upheaval. Alexandra lets out a scream. I remembered my mother's surprised expression and the angry yells of the groom. Alexandra phoned me the next day. She was really critical of me. You did it, but why? You have completely spoiled the wedding. However, I answered calmly. I just stated the truth to everyone. Don't you think you were the one who wrecked it? I had no idea that what I had said would make her even more enraged. After that, I spent a few days away on a work trip. The front door was open when I got back. I entered the home carefully, my heart thumping like a drum. There was terrible ransacking in the room. The floor was littered with items from the shelves. There were damaged picture frames and a painting on the floor that I treasured. While I waited for the cops to come, I contacted them right away. Without making any changes, I carefully considered the circumstances. Then I saw a little silver chime that stuck out amid the broken vase fragments on the floor of the living room. Alexandra usually wore it as part of a bracelet, and I felt a flutter of nervousness in my chest as I took up the charm. I had no evidence yet, but I wondered whether this may point to something. When the cops finally showed up, I told them what was going on in the room. Following a careful examination, the cops started looking at the security camera video. Alexandra's body was vividly recorded in the video, which they watched together, coming late at night into my residence. When I saw this, my heart froze. The police started acting on the suspicion that Alexandra was the culprit when the video was used as proof. I spoke with a lawyer called George on the next course of action as the cops went through their procedures. This is a clear case of illegal entry, he stated softly after seeing the security film. Legal action may be taken if we discover proof of stealing. I had made up my mind. Alexandra is not someone I could forgive. She had committed a felony in addition to insulting me. George and I went to the police station a few days later and made an official complaint. My rage eventually transformed into a composed resolve, and I silently awaited the day to bring Alexandra justice. Alexandra barged into my office the day the summons came. Everyone's eyes turned to us in rage as the sound of her shoes reverberated through the still workplace. Alexandra looked up at me and said louder, "What have you done, Jocelyn?" Even though her voice was shaking, it was clearly angry. "What have I done?" I said calmly as I got up from my desk. All I saw was justice. Alexandra hesitated a second. Then she lost control of her emotions. Fairness. It all began when you destroyed my wedding. I calmly but firmly responded to that. Ruined your wedding? You did that on your own. For a second, Alexandra seemed stunned. but then her cheeks flushed as she tried to respond. "But you?" I interrupted her and went on. "You committed a crime. You broke into my room and looted it, in addition to stealing our mother's money. The cops have already received the evidence. The court will now make the decision." She fell to the ground. Weeks later, I slipped back into my chair and went back to work. As the picture of Alexandra breaking into my room appeared on the courtroom screen on the day of the trial, I took the witness stand and showed the security tape. "The verdict was guilty," the gallery whispered. "In addition to being given a suspended sentence, Alexandra was mandated to compensate me for my losses." Alexandra turned to face me after the trial, her censure laced with rage. "You did this, but why? After suing your family in this way, are you happy?" I was dumbfounded by her demeanor, which implied that she considered herself the victim. Alexandra departed with a bitter scowl and never admitted her errors until the very end. I let out a long sigh as I watched her go. Then I left the courtroom in silence. I could feel the tension that had been strained within of me after the trial at last start to unwind. Alexandra has been subject to legal consequences. A new chapter in my life was about to start, and justice had been done. Jocelyn, my mother, called me approximately a week after the trial. In order to get back the money Alexandra took from me, I made the decision to sue her. "She's not my daughter anymore. My only child is you," she said, something that surprised me. My mother's criticism of Alexandra was the first I had ever heard. My mother had always supported Alexandra and never placed blame on her, regardless of the difficulties she had created in the past. "Mom, do what you believe is best." On the other end of the phone, I could hear her gasping for air. However, she made a fast suggestion in a more casual manner. "Let's take a trip together when I receive the money back." I grasped the receiver tighter. "It's not right, is it, Mom?" Silently, I said. After a long pause, my mother asked in a perplexed tone, "What? What's the matter?" I inhaled deeply and tried to speak as gently as I could. "Alexandra bears personal responsibility for her actions, naturally. However, don't you also bear some of the blame? You've always lavished her with attention, giving her the impression that she could get away with anything." I knew my mom was going to say something, but I went on anyway. "Receiving your money back may be crucial, but it won't make a difference on its own." Over the phone, I could hear her breathing. I think she understood what I was saying. "I am aware that my indulgence in Alexandra has been excessive. I acknowledge that I have also been awful to you." I didn't say anything in response to what she said. It seemed as though the consequences of my mother's involvement in Alexandra and my tense relationship had only now come to light. I had pursued justice against Alexandra, but I still hadn't reconciled my love for my mother. Even if I've given Alexandra justice, it doesn't mean I've forgiven you. I'm not kind enough to overlook your hasty treatment of me. I will now be living alone. You ought to as well. I hung up the phone after saying those last words. After that, my mother started sending me emails every day, professing her regret and desire to make things right. Words of regret, such as "I'm sorry," were common in the communications. "Give me one more opportunity, please, and I'm very sorry I wounded you." I was unable to determine whether my mother sincerely regretted her actions or wished for my return. Her remarks, however, did not strike a chord with me because of the accumulation of previous experiences. I never responded to her. Instead, I just silently ignored her messages. I finally blocked her contact details. I felt like it was too late for her to comprehend how hurt I was. A new life then awaited me, resolved to break off from previous connections. I made the decision to continue working. My coworkers helped me out during lunch. "You did nothing wrong, and it's excellent that justice was served," many others said. Their encouragement drove their support, which was really gratifying. I put a lot of effort into my work and eventually got back to my normal. I got a letter one day. Alexandra was the sender to Jocelyn. "I've lost everything. I'm sorry I tried to get even with you, but isn't it too late? Mom has also left me. I cannot be pardoned. I hope you're happy. The least I can do to set things right is that. Alexandra." When I finished reading the letter, I was almost overcome with complicated feelings. Do I have to believe her apology? Or should I simply ignore the past and go on? It was difficult to locate the solution. A few months later, I was holding a glass at a celebration honoring the accomplishment of a new project. I looked around the room and saw a familiar back coming. I recognized it as Alexandra, a waitress at the party location. She seemed completely worn out, not at all like the glitzy person she used to be. She had a bad complexion, and her eyes showed signs of weariness. As she served visitors their beverages, she grinned desperately. However, there was a tinge of emptiness in her grin. I observed her for some time, and while she bustled about, our gazes locked many times. After a brief moment of astonishment, Alexandra glanced away and went back to work. I had a weird sensation in my chest. Then Mandy came up to me. It appears that Alexandra ended her engagement to Kevin, she told me. Mandy began to talk softly. She had a worried expression on her face. I was unable to answer her right away. Then she went on. Alexandra appears to have been having financial difficulties ever since the trial. She also appears to be in a tight spot. Because Kevin has claimed alimony from her, she even requested a loan from me. She appears to be doing other jobs in addition to this one. I experienced a range of emotions after learning about Alexandra's financial difficulties and her desperate work. But this was all the punishment she was due. She shouldn't be pardoned for what she did. I took a quick look at Alexandra. I was aware of the irony that she was now employed as a waitress after teasingly referring to me as such during the wedding. She must now be acutely aware of the extent of her betrayal and damage to others. As we continue our conversation with Mandy, I hope Alexandra will take stock of her previous behavior and lead a more moral life going ahead. My mother was mentally besieged, I also found out. A relative mentioned that she was cooped up within the house and had not left. I didn't feel sorry for her when I heard that her family was worried about her. My mother's predicament and Alexandra's treachery were both the result of their own deeds, and I think my mother ought to acknowledge that. In my opinion, my mother should face her difficulties alone. She also has a problem if she is unable to alleviate her own sorrow. It now seems too hard to make amends with my family. I should choose a path where I can esteem myself without the shadow of my family. I plan to seek my own pleasure going forward, independent of my family's circumstances, without being constrained by the expectations of others or a sense of duty. I'm determined to have a happy life, without thinking about the past. For me, the best course of action is to move on and live at my own speed. I hold my life in my hands. I want to take control of my happiness and make sure that I have days that make me feel good. Story 3. Without telling me, my entire family took a plane to the Bahamas. Dad responded, "You always ruin the mood." I simply walked home, let out my laughs, and canceled all of the transfers without arguing. Their bank account began to bounce a few days later. Make sure to click the subscribe button and activate the notification bell before we begin this exciting narrative, so you don't miss any of our most recent uploads. We continue because of your support. Let's get started now. We didn't want you there, therefore you weren't invited. I couldn't comprehend the words as I gazed at the message on my phone. My thumb shook a little as it lingered over the screen. I blinked, go over it once more. On the other hand, expecting that the wording might change in some way. Something more human, more rational, something gentler. However, it didn't. It didn't change. Icy, decisive, and unrepentant. My father sent me a single text message that was more powerful than any punch. You weren't welcome there. I couldn't decide whether to scream or laugh. My body seemed unable to know how to respond, as a peculiar numbness traveled from my chest to my limbs. I looked back at the sequence of events that had brought me to this point, and for the first time, the jigsaw pieces of denial and bewilderment came together to make a picture so ruthless and purposeful that the day before, I had opened Instagram during lunch and was idly browsing through photos and stories to pass the time. I saw it at that moment. Frank, my younger brother, posted this picture. A golden wave on a sunny beach. Drinks in hand, everyone in bright swimwear. Familiar faces were smiling with smiles. Our parents, my cousins, my siblings, together all of them, calmed, joyful. Well-deserved family retreat was the caption. Palm tree family, blue heart. I felt like I was punched in the gut by that word. I enlarged the image, looking at every nook and cranny and every reflection, as though I may be able to locate a part of myself there. A sneaker, a hand, anything. Naturally, though, I wasn't on the trip. Thus, I wasn't in the photo, since I was completely unaware of it. As I read through the rest of Frank's articles, my heart was racing. More images, more grins. Nothing despite a boat trip, a group supper at an exclusive resort, and late-night dancing beneath fairy lights. No one has messaged you? No clues? No, I wish you were present. No, I had to go without you. Nothing but quiet. Exclusion. I checked my mails, go through the chat in our family group. A ghost town. I sent the last SMS 2 weeks ago, advising Dad to take his blood pressure medicine as prescribed. No response. I had assumed that he was either inattentive or forgotten. It now resembled a breadcrumb path of indifference. When I eventually contacted him, my hands were icy. The second ring caught his attention. "Hello, young one." He spoke upbeatly, as if nothing were wrong. I wasted no time. "Where are all of you?" A pause occurred. It took me just a second to notice. I said, "We're going on vacation without me." One more quiet. Then he let out a sigh, as though I were the one acting irrationally. "Well, we assumed you wouldn't want to attend." I chuckled in amazement rather than delight. "You obviously spent months preparing a family trip, and you anticipated I wouldn't want to go." He stated bluntly, "We didn't think you'd care. You're always occupied. You are always at work. To be honest, you kind of sapped the enthusiasm." Something seemed to crack within of me. Not yet out of rage, but from a revelation so agonizing it almost seemed unreal. "What exactly made you determine that I didn't belong?" Using my full name, as he often did when he wanted to appear tough and rational, he said, "It's not personal, Samuel. We just believe that this was the best course of action." I spoke in a quiet, measured tone. "Every month, I send you $2,500. He didn't answer. "I've taken care of the auto repairs, paid off your debts, and assisted with the hospital expenses. I've lost out on opportunities, promotions, and vacations because I was worried about you and your mother." "Don't worry about this," he whispered. I refrained from screaming. I refrained from using profanity. I just hung up. After that, I sat in the quiet, looking into space while holding my phone. There was silence, no frenzy, no tears. Like I had finally reached the end of a long, tiresome path, my entire body stuck in place. They remembered to invite me. They hadn't thought I was preoccupied. I wasn't wanted there. This was no mistake. This was a choice. With fingertips that hardly felt like mine, I launched my banking app. In 3 days, the $2,500 monthly transfer was supposed to be sent out. I called it off. After that, I looked into the emergency fund account that I had been making contributions to for many years. The balance was almost nil. It was, of course. I deleted their access and relocated what little remained into my own account. I then performed an action that resembled breathing after drowning. They were prevented by me. My mother came after my father, then one by one each sibling. My phone dropped on the dark sofa screen. I reclined. For the first time in years, eyes were wide open, and the heart was oddly at ease. I wasn't there to protect them. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt anything. Relief. The respite, however, was short-lived. My phone was buzzing like it was being attacked by the following morning. Voicemails, texts, calls, and alerts from Instagram, Facebook, and even LinkedIn. All of a sudden, people I hadn't spoken to in years started contacting me. My aunt's message was the first one I opened. "Hey, I just got a tearful call from your mom. What's happening?" Next is Nancy, my cousin. "Did you really cut off your parents?" "Hold on. What took place?" The guilt trips followed. "Your selfishness is unbelievable. When you were growing up, they gave you everything. You're leaving your family behind." However, one message was very clear. It originated from an unidentified number. "After everything we've done for you, do you really think you can just leave us? You are pitiful. I hope you like you're alone." Before I had finished reading my father, I knew who it was. I gazed at it, blood frigid, heart still, and I had no feelings, no anger, no grief, just fatigue. The fact that they had harmed me did not make them furious. They were upset that they could no longer use the bank. Me. For the first time, too, I didn't give a damn. I hung up the phone, made coffee, sat beside the window. Outside, I listened to the city. They could yell, guilt trip, manipulate. It no longer mattered, as I had no intention of returning. Not now. A line had been drawn by me, and I was going to hold it for once. No longer saving lives. Don't help them anymore. Allow them to discover what life is like without a son to take advantage of. Let them experience what it's like to be independent at last. And me? I was free for the first time in my life. The quiet was short-lived. It never does. My phone had turned into a weapon by the next day's afternoon. An endless stream of notifications, messages, and calls. I had just blocked my close relatives, not everyone else. However, the tentacles extended farther. They always do. Aunt Margie, Nancy, my cousin, Uncle Dennis. Companions. It has been months since we last chatted. Suddenly, they were all humming with judgment, worry, and barely disguised indignation. My aunt's SMS was the first one I opened. "Samuel, your mom is crying. What's happening? You just stopped assisting them," she said. "That you broke off communication. Are you all right?" Then one more straightforward one. "After everything your parents have done for you, did you truly desert them?" The avalanche followed. There were dozens of variants on the same topic, all of them attacking me as if I were a terrible traitor, an ungrateful son, a callous child. It's as though I vowed to torture my elderly parents out of hatred after waking up one day. What? Didn't any of them ask? Why was the question none of them wanted to ask? "Hey, I heard what transpired was not mentioned in any of the messages. I apologize. It must have been painful. Nobody inquired as to whether they actually took a vacation without you." It all amounted to instantaneous condemnation, control of guilt. Sitting in my flat, surrounded by the expectations of others, I gazed at the accumulation of digital judgment. And I came to a realization that I had not before completely acknowledged to myself. I was never seen by them. All they saw was the cash. My parents weren't the only ones who had become accustomed to me fixing things. The extended family was also involved. I was the one who always stood up when there was a funeral, the responsible one, and the success story. When someone needed tuition assistance, I made the payment. In the event of a medical emergency, I volunteered. I was present. However, they turned against me the instant I stopped and made my own decision. The messages became more ominous. "Your selfishness is unbelievable. You're abandoning the people who brought you up. Are you even aware of the sacrifices your parents made for you? Given up?" They informed me without embarrassment that they didn't want me on a family trip. It didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter I was there. But there was plenty of money that counted. I had assumed that was the worst-case scenario. The manipulation of emotions, the guilt, and the messages. I was mistaken. The actual assault had not yet begun. It started when I observed my boss's expression when I arrived at work 2 days later. He gestured to a chair, shut the door behind me, and summoned me into his office. "Have a moment, Samuel?" I sat, attempting to maintain a regular breathing pattern. He folded his hands and murmured, "This morning, your mother called and said hello." The words sent shivers down my back. "She informed me that you were experiencing an emotional breakdown. He kept keeping a close eye on me, saying that you were alienating your family and making poor financial choices. You need a vacation," she remarked. My voice had to remain calm while I tightened my hands in my lap. "That is untrue," he responded. "I didn't think it was." "I don't care about your private affairs," I informed her. I still needed to check in, though. Slowly, I nodded. "I'm all right." I felt taken advantage of, so I stopped giving my parents financial assistance. "They're angry. This is just that," he reclined. "I think you're real. However, Samuel, if they get in touch with the office again, this type of meddling is unacceptable. You tell me right away. You get it?" "I get it." I had a stomachache when I walked out of his office. It was more than humiliation. Betrayal on top of betrayal was what happened. In an effort to humiliate or frighten me back into conformity, my own mother had attempted to undermine my career by portraying me as unstable. They weren't satisfied with using private communications to guilt-trip me. If it meant taking back power, they intended to ruin me and publicly disgrace me. The pressure increased that night. I received messages from folks I hadn't spoken to since high school. Voicemails, SMS, burner phones, and new numbers. "According to your mother, you won't reply. What's happening? They claim that you're behaving oddly. Do I need to worry about you? Why are you treating your family like this?" I saw one message. They claimed that in order to live, They are thinking about selling furniture. Samuel, do you truly want that? The wording was flawless, manipulative, turned into a weapon, kindness. It was implied that I was doing more than simply allowing them to suffer. It was that by failing to stop their suffering, I was being unkind. Just inconvenience, not danger or poverty. I felt like screaming. I texted back instead. They're not having any difficulties. They are deceiving. Don't get involved, please. However, people were drawn in by my family, so they became participating. Carl, my best buddy, even sent me a message. Hey, I got a message from your mom on Facebook. Stunned, I gazed at the sentence. What was it she said? I inquired. He emailed a screenshot a few seconds later. She had sent a private message. I'm really concerned about Samuel, Carl. I'm sorry to worry you like this. He has been behaving oddly, isolating himself from his family, and makes snap judgments. We fear that he is despondent. Encourage him to get in touch if you hear from him. All we want to do is assist. Before I could say anything, I called Carl. Dude, don't worry, he said. None of that seems credible to me. Thank you. I let out a breath. All they are upset about is that I stopped the money, I assumed. Still, he said, it's low, very low. Yes. My throat was dry as I murmured. Yes, it is. I couldn't sleep that night, so I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. Every several minutes, my phone buzzed. The emotional onslaught, the constant pressure, it was oppressive. They pretended that I was the one separating myself in an attempt to isolate myself. It was simpler for them to characterize me as crazy than to acknowledge their own wrongdoing. Worst of all, they were beginning to be believed by some. The true risk was that they may restore their victim status if they could change the tale so that I was the antagonist in the shattered sun. And I would be the antagonist if enough people accepted that story by themselves. Chilly. Callous. They said that I was, not because I actually was. I became aware of something profound as I gazed into the darkness. Calls and messages weren't going to be the end of this. They were only getting started in this conflict. You can only take so much until something inside of you explodes. I eventually had enough of being harassed by messages that were spread behind my back and portrayed as unstable to my friends and job. I had finished my defensive game. I had enough of being silent. All well, if they intended to get everyone involved in this disaster. I was going to share the entire tale, though. No more partial truths. If they were going to distort the story, they could no longer hide behind remorse or civility. I intended to tear down the curtain and reveal to everyone what had been going on for all these years. I then launched Facebook, nor an ambiguous post, nor a tale, a public complete status. After a brief period of my fingers hovering over the keyboard, I began typing. No insults, no drama, just the facts. Like glass, it's simple and crisp. Hi everyone, just to make everything clear. It's not a breakdown for me. I haven't left my family behind. For years, I've just stopped giving my parents money assistance. I made sure they had enough money to live comfortably by paying their expenses and covering their obligations. I donated $2,500 per month to support the cause, and I never once voiced any complaints. I recently learned that they purposefully left me out of the family trip they had planned. It wasn't a coincidence or a schedule conflict. They declined my invitation. When I inquired as to why, "We didn't want you there," they said. They have since contacted my friends, coworkers, and even my employer to inform people that I am mentally ill and making bad choices. All of this results from my decision to no longer support their way of life. You now know the truth if they tell you that I'm not feeling well or that I'm going through something. I'm not erratic. I've had enough of being exploited. I clicked post. I then waited after shutting down the app. It took very little time. The response began to pour in within minutes. Notifications, private messages, shares, likes, and comments came in so quickly that I was unable to keep up. A few were taken aback. Others felt enraged for me. The first communication was from my cousin Nancy. "Hold on. They went on vacation without you, and you paid for it. It's screwed up." Uncle Dennis's son came next. "I didn't know. You have always been giving. Don't allow anyone to make you feel bad for finally expressing enough." Then they phoned me last week and said you were acting weird, Aunt Ashley. I was unaware that it was because you interrupted them. That is repulsive. The remarks followed, ones that are public. People are supporting me and calling them out. My uncle made a post. How can you claim to be having difficulties while you were receiving $2,500 every month from Samuel? Most folks don't even make that much. Tell the truth. A relative added their voice. Before, you had no problem spending his money, but now that the cash flows have stopped, he's suddenly the villain. They were seeing the disintegration of the meticulously crafted facade they had attempted to maintain in order to shield the defenseless, impoverished parents who had been deserted by their ungrateful son. Sitting at their kitchen table, I could picture their expressions when their phones exploded and the falsehoods were made public for everyone to read. No more one-sided discussions or whispered tales. I wasn't finished yet, but the curtain had been drawn back. I was going to make sure that everyone knew the truth if they chose to include others in this. And that includes their landlord, the one person I ought to have contacted long ago. I retrieved the number and punched it. Hi there? After a few rings, he answered. Hello, this is Samuel, Mr. Ryan. Jennings, Samuel. A pause. Indeed. Is everything all right? I only wanted to inform you. I carefully explained that I would no longer be paying my parents' rent. Had we made any prior arrangements? Think about them. A loud chuckle followed by another pause. Well, I assumed that this day would ultimately arrive. I was surprised by it. What are you saying? Your parents have often failed to pay their rent on time. Every time they responded, "Don't worry, our son will take care of it," he said in a calm voice. They saw it as a given, as though you were an inbuilt safety net. I clenched my jaw. Well, today is the last day of it. I get it. Oh, he said. Next month I'll be expecting the rent on time. They will have to face the repercussions if they don't. I sat there after we hung up. At last, the gravity of the situation set in. I've been filling in the gaps in their lives, covering their poor choices, and providing for their comfort for years. They would now experience what it was like to live without that crutch for the first time. My phone rang once more that night. Barbara, my sister, are you really using Facebook to post about our family? I didn't think twice. Nothing is being revealed by me. Our parents have been spreading lies, and I'm correcting them. They are humiliated by this. Perhaps they ought to have considered that before attempting to portray me as mentally ill. Quiet. You're being cold then. No, I said. I'm telling the truth. After that, she did not respond. I could picture the mayhem that would break out on their end. Frantic calls and last-ditch efforts to limit the damage. All the relatives who had finally heard my side of the story were given frantic explanations. They had misjudged me. They assumed that, as usual, I would fold and return in a shambles. Not this time, though. I didn't have anything to conceal this time. Indeed, they were. And it was finally being seen by the world. The consequences quickly made their way to my house. Literally. The hammering on my front door started while I was in the middle of my dinner. Not a courteous knock. It was urgent, crazy, the knocking that called for attention. As if the person on the other side thinks that physical force could breach every barrier, not just the door, I had just been trying to build for weeks. I slowly stood up and peered through the crowd. Mom. She held her phone tightly as she stood there. She had a pale face. She was tense. I hesitated, hand hovering near the knob for a split second. I considered pretending not to be home, but a deeper part of me, the one that had been quiet for years, was curious. What excuse would you give now? What lie was she about to spin? I opened the door. She stepped forward immediately, but I blocked the entrance with my arm. Her face was drawn and swollen, her eyes red from crying. She looked like a woman at the end of her rope, and I wondered for just a moment if this was the first time in years she'd ever felt what it was like to be at someone else's mercy. Samuel, please, she said, her voice cracking. We need to talk. About what? I asked calmly. Mr. Ryan called. She said, blinking quickly, as if even saying it aloud made it more real. He told us you won't be paying the rent anymore. I told you I was done, I replied. Why is this a surprise? Tears welled up in her eyes again. You are necessary to us. No, I said, voice flat. You need my money. She recoiled, somewhat like I'd smacked her. We reared you, she whispered. We took care of you. And now, Now that we're the ones who need aid, you're turning your back on us." A bitter laugh escaped my throat before I could stop it. "You didn't appear to need me when you planned an entire vacation and didn't invite me. You didn't need me when you assured me I'd bring the energy down. Remember that?" She opened her lips, but no words came out. "So let's be honest," I continued. "You didn't regard me as family. You regarded me as a service. You didn't care whether I existed as long as the money arrived on schedule. And you attempted to ruin my reputation. As soon as I ceased to be useful, you visited my pals. You gave my supervisor a call. You attempted to portray me as insane. What comes next? Do you wish to be forgiven?" Her cheeks were wet with tears. "You will just let us struggle then?" I fixed her with a steady, unwavering look. "You'll get by." She looked at me as if I were someone she had never seen before. Perhaps, in a sense, she did not. She was meeting the version of her son who had finally drawn a line, perhaps for the first time. Not the ATM, the fixer, or the assistant. A man who simply had enough. Slowly, her grief transformed into something else. Anger. She corrected her stance. She squinted. "All right." She lost her temper. "We won't ever forgive you if this is who you've turned into." Casually, I leaned against the doorframe. "Pardon me. For what purpose?" "To keep me safe. For establishing limits." "No, Mother. You and your father are the only ones who ought to be pleading for forgiveness." She tightened her jaw. Without saying another word, she turned and left. I secured the door and shut it behind her. I refrained from crying. I didn't tremble. I didn't think twice. As her footsteps dwindled down the corridor, I stood there and listened. And I grinned as I had one for the first time in my life. However, the drama was far from ended. Barbara sent me a message within 1 hour. "Mom was upset when she got home." What were your words to her? The reality. "It's callous of you. She lost control, which is why she is unhappy." Not because I was lost by her. A pause occurred. Then my father sent me a fresh note. "You choose what to do, avoid making a mistake, and then regretting it." After giving it a long look, I typed back the final words I would ever utter to him. "I won't." Weeks went by after a few days. No more text messages. No more phone calls. The quiet was life-giving and oxygen-rich. Before I had this space for the first time in years, I had no idea how much I had needed it. My paycheck didn't change. No unexpected requests, no never-ending crises, and no silent animosity concealed under happy family portraits. I was able to save money. My sleep improved. As I waited for the next guilt grenade, I stopped looking at my phone every few minutes. I began organizing my own vacation, my first genuine vacation in a long time. I looked at hotels, looked at flights, and made arrangements without anyone's permission. I imagined myself standing on a beach with a drink in my hand, grinning for a picture out of genuine happiness rather than duty. Not that I was their bank. I wasn't there to protect them. I had freedom. Then an unforeseen event occurred. I was at ease, the type of tranquility that comes from justice, retaliation, or even spite. Clarity and the realization that I hadn't overreacted were the sources. I was not insane, that I had every right to leave when it got too hard, and that I had given more than most people would ever give. They had made every effort to yank me away. They made use of guilt. They told falsehoods. They took advantage of those around me. When none of that worked, they turned to humiliation in public. However, none of it was successful. Because the truth doesn't return once it's out. And it was an easy truth. I donated. They took. I made a line. They went over it. I turned to leave. It's not treachery. Self-respect is that. So I let it go. Not only of them, but also of the me who thought that sacrifice was necessary to win love. Who thought it was crazy to be a good son, being silent and conflating servitude with loyalty. I was no longer that person. The new me. He is discovering the true meaning of family. It's not blood either. Boundaries are the issue. Respect is reciprocated. Love is a giving thing. And they have no right to be in my life at all if they are unable to provide me with that. Silence turns into clarity at some point in everyone's life. Sometimes freedom comes from letting go. Additionally, it is no longer selfish to put oneself before others. It is a matter of survival. I've thought for years that sacrifice and love go hand in hand, that family fulfilled its responsibilities. that giving unrelentingly and without question was the mark of a good son, even at the expense of my tranquility, my aspirations, and my honor. I believed that being loyal meant taking on all responsibilities, covering all debts, resolving all crises, and expecting nothing in return. That, I believed, was the appearance of love. However, I was mistaken. More than anything else, this incident taught me that love isn't love if it doesn't include respect. Even if you invest your time, money, and emotions in someone, it won't be love if they simply appreciate you for what you provide them rather than for who you are. Dependency is the issue. Furthermore, one of the most harmful types of manipulation is reliance passed off as affection. It keeps you stuck in a cycle where your value is determined by how valuable you are rather than how human you are. My father's statement that we didn't want you there, something broke inside of me. However, another thing emerged. Years of silent suffering and people-pleasing have buried a feeling of self-worth. I came to the realization that I had prioritized other people before myself for the most of my adult life. When I wanted to say no, I said yes. I was already empty before I donated. I went above and beyond to provide for a family that never once inquired about my well-being. I wasn't invited into their life by them. They anticipated that I would finance it remotely, and they didn't offer me any sympathy when I dared to stop. Their reaction was emotional warfare, anger, and blame. It helped me realize that, despite the sacredness of family, no one has the right to cross your limits. Although blood ties us together, it does not give someone the right to your life, money, or energy. Particularly among families, sacrifice is romanticized in our culture. We are told that good children always look out for their parents, because it is our responsibility to give back to those that reared us. However, what occurs if those same individuals abuse that obligation? What occurs when giving becomes into a transaction rather than a bond when love is one-sided? I learned from this experience that setting limits is not inhumane. They are necessary. You don't become cold-hearted by saying no. You are not a horrible person for refusing to be taken advantage of. You become someone who knows that love isn't about losing who you are. Meeting in the center is the goal, as well as when they decline to meet you there. You don't have to continue pushing yourself. All right, you may leave. The fact that not everyone will comprehend your progress is another difficult yet freeing lesson I've learned. And that's all right. There are those who will hold on to the version of you that suits them. They'll claim that you've evolved. They will accuse you of being resentful, aloof, or self-centered. In reality, though, they are saying that you are no longer easily manipulated, and they become anxious when they lose control. They attempt to undermine you, guilt trip. In an attempt to return to your previous self, you turn others against you, who provided without hesitation. Avoid falling for that. In actuality, you have no control over how other people respond to your limits. All you have to do is keep them in good condition. Those that genuinely care about you will honor those boundaries. They will view your boundaries as a way to take care of themselves rather than as a sign of rejection. And those who are unable to respect your limits, in the first place, they were never truly with you. What you could do for them was what they were. I also discovered how powerful truth is. Something incredible occurred when I at last stood up and revealed to the public what had been going on behind the scenes. People paid attention. They were on my side. They acknowledged my suffering. And gradually, the humiliation that I had been dragging around for years started to fade. Secrecy perpetuates poisonous patterns because it shields abusers. But the truth, you are freed by truth. It illuminates areas that are dark. It makes people answerable. And occasionally, it even inspires others to talk about their personal experiences. The fact that this liberation starts the instant you stop requesting permission to keep your peace, however, may be the most significant thing I've ever learned. You can take back your life, your time, and your energy without anyone's permission. You don't have to explain why you no longer tolerated rudeness. You don't have to justify your superiority. You just do, and you quit attempting to persuade others after you've come to terms with that fact. You simply live it. I've now found something unexpected on the other side of the pandemonium: calm. The type of calm that comes from not cleaning up other people's trash or getting credit. A calm that results from realizing that I'm not in charge of other people's happiness anymore, that I'm free to prioritize myself, that my decision to choose healing over duty does not imply cruelty. It's quieter on my phone now. My wallet is no longer a resource for the community. My mind, which was before overflowing with guilt and overanalyzing, is now free to dream. I take trips. I have a good night's sleep. I'm laughing more. I make things. Additionally, I've discovered that I should surround myself with people who appreciate me for who I am, rather than what I can provide anyone else who feels stuck in a similar circumstance. Hear this, please. Making your own decisions is not selfish. Refusing to be used does not make you cruel. Your life is not something you owe your family, particularly when they have explicitly said that they view you as nothing more than a tool. Love shouldn't feel like a binding agreement. You failed to sign. Respect is a must. Furthermore, you do not have to gain serenity by going through hardship. You were permitted to go. You had the right to say enough. As well as when you ultimately decide to pick yourself. The freedom on the other side will be stronger than anything you have ever experienced.